Conversations with Azu Ishekwene.
There are 3 Guineas in Africa: Equatorial Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, and Guinea-Conakry. They all have many things in common, one of which is the travesty of democratic rule. Equatorial Guinea, for instance, is notorious for how to turn a country into a family estate through constitutional aberrations. On November 26, however, little Guinea-Bissau, with a population of 2 million, less than Nasarawa and Bayelsa are the least populated states in Nigeria by current estimates, degraded the difficult art of coup making into something ridiculous. In what former President Goodluck Jonathan had pressed for words described as a ceremonial coup, defeated President Umaru Sissoco Embalo colluded with some favored soldiers and civilians and relinquished power to them before bolting to safety, obviously to avoid handing over to his political rival. How long will African leaders continue to play pranks in the name of democracy or civil governance? And what can the African Union or the Economic Community of West African States do in the face of such well-orchestrated assaults on governance and political stability? Welcome to Conversation with Azu, our weekly diary on life and politics. Today we are discussing that troubling message from Guinea-Bissau. As always, Azu Ishekwene, who keeps the diary, is here to deepen this conversation. Hello, Azu.
Thanks for having me, Julius.
Are we coming to the era of one election, one coup?
Great question. In your intro, you talked about Equatorial Guinea. It's interesting that the longest-serving African president is actually in Equatorial Guinea.
One of them.
Yes, one of them. Well, Nguema has been there. President Nguema of Equatorial Guinea has been there since 1979.
Oh, that was before Paul Biya.
Exactly. So, of Cameroon. So, it's probably the longest there. And it was only also in Equatorial Guinea that you had the very regrettable sex tape scandal involving the person who was Ngonga, I think. It was Balthazar Ngonga, who was supposed to be the anti-corruption czar, and then who ended up with, So, but I mean, that does not suggest that there are no heart-lifting or heartwarming stories from the continent. But of course, the 3 Guineas that you have mentioned, for reasons which I honestly cannot explain, have found themselves in this very, very difficult situation. Of course, Guinea-Conakry, you know the situation in Guinea-Conakry, that also fell to coup. And then, of course, Guinea-Bissau happened just last week, or on the 26th or 27th of November it was, when after the election, the president, sensing defeat, obviously, then engineered or manufactured the coup and then escaped to Dakar in Senegal. Well, to your question as to whether it's
one election,
one coup, I think that democracy, we have seen that transition and sustainable democracy requires more than just elections are events, and I think it's one question that the continent has to look itself in the mirror and ask itself, okay, so elections, that if you look at there will be schedule of elections, but how those elections are conducted, how they are held, and what happens after these elections continue to be very troubling issues that the continent will really need to grapple with. And we have just seen that example again in Guinea-Bissau.
You have a very good grip of the history of these Guinea countries, and could you briefly talk us through how the countries that produces the likes of Sekou Touré, Amilcar Cabral, as you referenced in your article, how did they become caricatures in real time?
That's a great question. You see, these things, the collapse, or the decline, if you like, of these democratic institutions do not happen suddenly. They happen very gradually. And you talk about, it was Guinea-Bissau that gave us, as I said in my column, Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral is one of the most foresighted revolutionaries in the continent, and that was in the late 60s, early 70s. Okay, and the work that he did, including the books and pamphlets and his thoughts, his thoughts. His thoughts and his engagements formed the basis for revolutionary struggles in South and Southern Africa, whether you're talking about ANC or Frelimo or SWAPO, or and so you then begin to wonder. But these things do not happen. They don't happen like you're turning on or turning off a switch. I think it's gradual decline because, in the 80s and early 90s, we saw a festering of coups in many African countries. Then we began to see what was like a rollback of all of those coups. Well, I think essentially the continent also has to ask itself very difficult questions about governance, because this is a major problem. It's all of these coups that are happening have also highlighted the need for better governance, so that when politicians come to power, most of the things they promise the people, unfortunately, they hardly deliver on their promises. And it's not as if the soldiers are better, but then, unfortunately, then they off the back of those failed promises, they then engineer discontent sometimes, or ride on the back of discontent to strike. And that's exactly what's been happening. I think we have seen an upsurge in terms the quality of governance has declined considerably. Of course, also there have been challenges regarding the economies. The world has been in a difficult place, and it's not just Africa. Supply chains have been disrupted, worsened, of course, by the onset of COVID. And we have not fully recovered from that, both as a world and as a continent. So we need leaders who, I think the governance structure has been a major problem, and very convenient excuse for soldiers who strike to do so. Not as if they are better, but I guess it's just the most handy excuse that they can lay their hands on.
And while we are at it, the Coup belt is expanding. We even had rumors in Nigeria in October.
Yes.
Is this a demonstration of a lack of faith in democracy?
It's a demonstration of many things. It's a demonstration of despair and frustration, amongst the swaths of populations of Africans and in different parts of the world. And of course, it's also a reflection of the rise of the strong man in different parts of the world. If you look at the United States, for example, other countries in Europe where Africa had very strong ties with, and we, as a continent, people used to look up to them, for either the exceptionalism or some of these values that you find that there's this rise of the strong man.
Demagogues.
Then the rise of demagogues. And that obviously is also having its knock-on effect on the continent, regrettably.
In 2003, President Olusegun Obasanjo stopped the coup in Sao Tome and Principe, which you also referenced, just by issuing a fiat,
yes,
without lifting a finger.
Yes.
But in 2025, ECOWAS, the African Union, are unable to do anything about coups. Why is this so?
You see, the capacity of the states, has severely declined in many African countries. The capacity in terms of economic strength, in terms of poverty has expanded, as I said. Because, you see, you cannot give what you do not have. At the time you are talking about, many of these countries and these economies were strong. The economies were doing quite well. And so the leaders of these countries had some sort of they had some sort of moral backbone to stand and speak, But unfortunately, these countries have been weakened by a combination of factors. And you find that, their leaders no longer have that moral strength. And as I said also, and you correctly referenced the rise of demagogues in many parts of the world. So many things. It's not a response to a single factor. I think it's just a collection of, it's more or less, if you like, it's a perfect storm. So many things have gone wrong and all coming together to create the sort of situation in which we find ourselves.
All right, we take a pause as I bring you an excerpt from Azu's article. 1 year after that transition was due to happen, and 10 months after his first term expired, Mbalo finally organized an election, but lacked the courage to wait for the results before he manufactured a coup led by two of his key allies, a general and a politician who were both members of his kitchen cabinet. In one of these most dramatic military takeovers, the fallen president was speaking to the press as troops were announcing his removal. And hours later, he was safely in Dakar, which had been like his second home. End of quote. Let's even talk about recent elections in Tanzania for context.
Yes.
President Samia Suluhu claimed she won 98% of the vote. That claim is fabulous, measured against the wave of protests that greeted the announcement of
you're
results.
right. And you see, the president in Tanzania started well. She, also, do you remember the circumstances under which she was the vice president and then came in after the president passed. But unfortunately, this very deadly bug that sort of hits them. She claims she won, but
the corruption of power.
Yes, the corruption of power. I mean, that is not reflected by what you find on the streets, the sort of protests and the wave of protests on the streets, which is very, very unfortunate. And you also cited continental and regional bodies which used also to speak up very strongly at the time in the past when we had the likes of Obasanjo, Sekou Toure, and of course Jerry Rawlings, and then of course
Nelson
Mandela. Nelson Mandela. Unfortunately, that again is missing. And Tanzania also had it. If you remember, we all remember very fondly Mwalimu Julius Nyerere for the example he said in what's the name of this? Ujamaa, yes, Ujamaa, which was a brand of socialism that sort of promoted the collective against the individual. And to think that it's the same Tanzania that we are dealing with, and these examples are multiplying. Unfortunately, as I said, continental and regional bodies are not also, because the whole is a sum of the parts. Once the parts begin to weaken, then the whole is also impacted. And that's exactly the situation we find ourselves in, unfortunately. But I understand that in the case of Guinea-Bissau, which is the main subject of our conversation, ECOWAS has, insisted, ECOWAS leaders, including, of course, former President Goodluck Jonathan, has insisted, and correctly so, I believe, that the full results of the election should be declared. CSOs have also organized, demanding a full release of the elections. But let's see. And I think there's also a body set up by ECOWAS to investigate what happened and have the results released. Let's see how far they're able to go. But remember what happened in Gambia. If the region had not bounded together and forced Yahya Jammeh out, we would probably have had this sort of thing. But I think that's been, as far as I can remember in recent times, that appears to be the last major success. After that incident, everything has just been downhill, unfortunately.
All right, and finally, if we look at practical examples like Cameroon, like Uganda, like the Equatorial Guinea we just referenced, why should citizens of ECOWAS country, or in fact any citizen anywhere in the world, even bother when governments are forcefully changed? Why should we bother?
We should, because it is in our interest to have people in power who are accountable to us as citizens. And if people emerge through any process at all that does not make them accountable to us as citizens, then we ought to worry about that.
All right. Okay. One more line from Azu's article for your listening pleasures, just to stimulate your interest to make an examination of it yourself. And I quote, "Bissau Guineans are on their own, and the world would hardly notice until the tornado of military coups makes a landfall in another African country." End of quote. For the full text of this and other articles, visit our website at azuishekwene.com, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and please leave your comments. And remember our new book, A Midlifer's Guide to Content Creation and Profit. Just go to www.azu.media. Thanks for coming on the show, Azu.
Thanks for having me once again, Julius. Pleasure.
Bye for now.